Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It is my pleasure to welcome again everybody to a new edition of Outlook, the foreign political program of the Ludovika TV. Today we are again welcoming a guest through an internet connection virtually, and our guest today is His Excellency Paul Fox, the Ambassador of the UK to Budapest. Good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon.
Ambassador Fox, I saw your CV and it is quite impressive, full of different regions, different countries. Some of them, I would say, hardship posts, because you served in Afghanistan, Iraq, you also served in Delhi, in Bangkok, so all over the place. But one thing stood out very clearly, that you have a connection to our region. You started your FCO career as a research analyst on Yugoslavia, then you became desk officer. You were spokesperson for our region, East Central Europe, in the FCO, which is quite an undertaking. You served in Warsaw, and recently you were Minister Counsellor in Moscow. So was it your ambition, sir, to come to Budapest, and what are your plans here?
Very much so. I was delighted that I was appointed ambassador to Budapest. As you've mentioned, looking at my CV, I have a connection with this region. I have an interest in and a love of Central and Eastern Europe. I studied at a university. My first degree was in history, and then I did a master's in Russian and East European Studies at Oxford, and I continued and studied for a doctorate in Russian history. And then that's when I joined the Foreign Office as a research analyst, focusing on Eastern Europe and in particular Yugoslavia. So I recall when I was in Poland, I was deputy ambassador there. I would come down to Budapest for conferences and the like at the embassy here. And I always thought then it'd be very, very nice to be ambassador here, but I never ever thought that would happen. And so when I was approached in the office and asked if I would be interested in applying for this job, I leapt at the chance, and I was very fortunate enough to be appointed to this position. And so very, very happy that I'm now here. But of course, it's not just about getting to a place, it's about what you're going to do when you're there. And I realized when I first arrived that one of the key opportunities was to thicken up the relationship between the UK and Hungary following our departure from the European Union. And in the last 6 months, I've been here for just 6 months now, I've thought about this in greater detail, and I've come up with a strategy in which our bilateral relationship, I think, is divided into 3 pillars. One is obviously defence and security, where our joint membership of NATO is absolutely crucial. We can work together in confronting the challenges we face and hopefully are underpinning and supporting regional stability, particularly in somewhere like Western Balkans. Then there's prosperity and commerce. I think our departure from the European Union offers us a huge range of opportunities there. And I'd link this to the climate change agenda as well, because following the pandemic, we're going to have to build back, and the green recovery is going to be important. And then finally, it's people to people. And that's not just about softer diplomacy, cultural diplomacy. It's about, I think, hard-edged issues like citizens' rights and educational exchanges.
Did you manage to pick up some Hungarian? Because the British ambassadors are normally very famous for speaking very good Hungarian.
Köszönöm szépen. Igen, megpróbálom tanulni magyarul, különösen nyáron, Pécset, mikor az egyetemista voltam, Pécsi Tudomány Egyetemen. Nagyon jó tapasztalat, de mint mondtam, csak megpróbáltam tanulni magyarul. Azt gondolom, hogy beszélek magyarul nagyon rossz, sajnos.
Tökéletesen beszél nagykövet úr magyarul, Thank you very much for showing us your Hungarian. I was sure that you spoke Hungarian. Dear Ambassador, these days it's not possible to avoid the question of the pandemic. We were very happy to hear the news that in Britain COVID-19 is hopefully really on the retreat. I'd like to ask you about the situation and the regulations a bit, perhaps about vaccination. That would be very interesting for us.
Well, you're right. We seem to be on a way out of the pandemic, but I think what I'd want to stress is, it's still going to be a long road. The Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, has outlined what he calls the roadmap out, and it's in various stages with 5-week intervals between each stage, with the hope, the aim of us being able to lift the vast majority of restrictions by the end of June. And it seems to be working. The vaccine rollout has been, I think, a great success. It shows that we learned from our earlier mistakes. We acted early. We booked a range of vaccines even before we knew they were going to be effective. We have now managed to offer vaccines to over 30 million people in the UK. But it's not just about the vaccines alone. It's about observing the various rules and regulations and restrictions. I'm afraid that those rules and regulations, I think, are going to be with us for some time to come, whether it be social distancing, whether it be mask wearing, whether it be washing hands. I think in order to ensure that we consolidate on the gains, we have to still be very observant. We still have to be careful about what we do. We still have to think very much about, say, social distancing. And this is not just for the UK. I think it applies throughout the whole of the world.
I really hope that we will succeed in defeating the pandemic all over the world, because it certainly affects foreign politics a lot. We learned how to use the internet and many other devices, but I think the personal contacts are crucial in diplomacy, and I think it's quite important. And I would like to emphasize that we hope that we can welcome you personally on campus at one point. Now, today's discussion with you is entitled Britain in the Modern World. And I think it's a good opportunity to discuss a little bit the important document the British government recently published on foreign political issues. This is an integrated review, as much as I understand, on Britain's position and also aims in foreign political areas like defense, security, but it touches upon climate change. So I just to mention one area. I wanted to ask you, what was the main aim of publishing this document, and what are the most important contents?
Well, I think the main aim of the integrated review, and it's not a very snappy title, but I think it's trying to capture what the government, what we are trying to get across, is we need to look at our position in the world following our departure from the European Union. It's the biggest change we've gone through in 50 years. And so we have to assess our place in the world, our role in the world, but also trying to define our ambition. And so the integrated review looks at foreign policy, but it also looks at defence and security, because it is running alongside a defence review, also looks at our development policy, and also links it to the domestic agenda. It's very much about the notion that you cannot divorce the domestic policy from your foreign policy, and that the two, work together. It's also about how government works in the UK. We need to work across the whole range of government departments in order to deliver on our ambition overseas. So it's integrated in several levels. So I think that was why it was published, as an assessment of our role in the world following the biggest change in our position in the world in half a century. Now, the two things that come out, when you initially read it, two really big things that come out, is assessment of the international order. I mean, previous reviews have talked about defending the international rule-based system as established in 1945. One of the points this review makes is that system is changing. We still believe in a rule-based system, but it's not just about defending what was established 70 years ago, 75 years ago. It's about recognizing there are real challenges to that system. How do we adapt to that? And at the same time, defend the things we believe in and which we think will enhance our security and our mutual prosperity. There are continuities. We still see the US as our major ally. We still see NATO as the key body for ensuring our security, particularly in Europe, in this region. And we're still going to be a force for good and advocates and defenders of human rights. But there are changes. There are things that have shifted. For example, you rightly pointed out, a top priority for us is tackling climate change and the science and technology that goes behind doing that. There's also a recognition that China is now our biggest systemic competitor. Now, this is not talking about a new Cold War. What this is talking about is recognizing that China is a major force now in the world. It's an economic and political giant. But it does have a different approach to things from us. It's a systemic competitor. And what we're trying to strive to do is cooperate with them where we can, for example, on climate change, compete with them, say, economically, but also counteract some of their behaviors which pose a challenge to us, whether it be in terms of security or in our values and so on and so forth. So it is a very challenging relationship. And I suppose the second point, as well as trying to shape and influence the new, well, it's not a new order, but try and shape and influence the change in international order, is the fact we recognise we have to do this with others. We have to do this with allies and partners, with like-minded countries who share our values, share our concerns, and with whom we have the same security interests. And I would include Hungary in one of those countries.
No question that we are going to still have a very, very strong connection through NATO, I believe. But then I'd like to ask you, where are the strong points, other strong points of British-Hungarian relations?
Well, obviously, I'd say on people to people. There are well over 100,000 Hungarians living in the UK. They've registered to remain resident in the UK. I wouldn't be at all surprised if there are more. And one of the messages I'd send across to the people watching this is, if you have friends or relatives who are in the UK who want to remain in the UK and they haven't registered, I would encourage them to apply for residency status, and they have until I think the end of June in order to do so. So I mean, I think that's a major strong link. We'll come on to this later, no doubt, which is I'm quite keen to develop stronger education relations between institutions as well as between governments. There's also, I mean, I want to try and thicken up relations on that people-to-people level through, say, working with the British Council, which is our key cultural body, but they're not only focused on cultural diplomacy, they provide English language training and so on and so forth. I'm sure there are areas there. So I think there are very thick relationships there. On the commercial side, it's about ensuring that under the terms of the Trade and Cooperation Agreement, which we signed with the European Union just before Christmas, that business can flourish. And that companies like Tesco, Vodafone, Ernst & Young, you name it, remain here and grow here, and hopefully to attract new investors here. And likewise, I hope that Hungarian companies are able to trade easily with the UK. So I think there are a range of areas where the relationship can be thickened up.
I really hope that education is going to be one of the areas which we can cooperate on. Ludovika University of Public Service is certainly very keen to have strong connections with British higher educational institutions. We are a specialized university, mainly educating young professionals for the public service, for the law enforcement entities, and also for the Hungarian National Army. But I'm sure that our researchers and students, our lecturers, professors are very interested to keep the good relations with British institutions. One element was taken away from us with Brexit,
Yes.
that is the Erasmus program.
Yes.
But we were very happy to hear about the Turing scheme that was launched by the British government recently. I'd like to ask you about that a little bit, and how you see the situation. Are the British universities, higher educational institutions interested in having relations with Central European or Hungarian institutions? How is our sub-question, how is our region seen in Britain? That is also very interesting.
I think that's a very good question. Let's deal with the educational links first and the Turing scheme,
Thank
and then
you.
I can move on to perceptions of this region. You're right. We have withdrawn from Erasmus. The British government decided it was too expensive, quite simply. But in order to ensure that British students were able to still study overseas and enjoy the benefits that, say, Erasmus offered them, the Turing scheme was introduced. Now, of course, it applies just to British students. It's not on offer to students in other countries. But that doesn't mean to say we still can't develop educational links. It still doesn't mean to say that we can't try and encourage, say, various universities to have exchange arrangements with sister universities in this region. And my embassy is actively working to try and encourage that, to try and build that. My deputy, Richard Shackleton, has been talking to a range of institutions, liaising with British universities, seeing if there's ways and means, if we can be creative about ensuring that educational links are not damaged as a consequence of our withdrawal from Erasmus. So it's still very much a work in progress, but we have something to work with. In terms of perceptions of this region, I think the perception of this region has changed completely in the last 20, 25 years, particularly since countries like Poland, Hungary, and other former Warsaw Pact members joined the European Union. I think up until the 90s, up until the early 2000s, the image of this region was still very much overshadowed by what people thought of this region during times of communism, rather grey, rather dour, impenetrable, little known. But I think the simple fact of you being members of the European Union, as well as NATO, but particularly European Union, and all the opportunities that brought, with people being able to travel around freely. I recall when I was in Poland 10, 15 years ago, we were looking at 1 or 2 million Poles living in the UK. They had set up 50,000 businesses and they were paying taxes. I think at one point there was between 200,000 and 300,000 Hungarians, and there were Romanians and Bulgarians and so on and so forth. And the British people got to know this region through those contacts, through that personal experience. And of course, it completely changed their views. So for a start, they didn't see it as an homogenous bloc. They started to realize that these were different countries with very different histories and very different cultures. And I think the understanding of this region has improved. I would say overall that the perception of this region has changed. And I would say through one simple fact alone, tourism. The number of British tourists coming here, and I think it was back in 2019, it was about 1 million British tourists came to Budapest mainly on city breaks. They started to experience this region and what it had to offer. So it completely revolutionized the perception of this whole part of the world. And hopefully, that will continue once we get the pandemic behind us.
Thank you very much. It was quite reassuring, and I hope that as Hungary is taking over the presidency of the Visegrad 4 group in midsummer, we can really show ourselves a little bit more in Britain, our region. And I really hope that we can also have more contacts with you, sir. I'd like to thank you very much for your availability. And again, I'd like to reiterate that it was not a full encounter with you. It was only just the first step until we can welcome you on campus and perhaps ask you to give us a full lecture. Ambassador Fox, thank you very much for being with us.
Köszönöm szépen, és nagyon örülök, hogy találkozunk, és remélem, hogy találkozunk megint hamarosan.
Nagyon szépen köszönöm, nagykövet úr.
Oké, köszönöm szépen.